My boss fired me after 20 years, without a word. I left quietly, then the clients followed. My name is David. I had worked at the same firm since I was 24. I wasn't trying to be flashy, I just did the work, day in and day out. I stayed late when no one asked me to. I picked up the slack when others fell behind. I became the one people came to when they didn't know what to do. And for 2 decades I never gave them a reason to doubt me. I wasn't the loudest in the room. I wasn't the guy who brought in donuts or told jokes at meetings, but I was the one clients trusted. When things got messy, they asked for me. Not out of friendship, out of certainty. They knew I'd fix it. So when it happened, when I was fired without even a conversation, it didn't feel like betrayal. Not at first, it felt like error, a glitch in the system, an oversight someone would correct. But they didn't. It was a Friday, not even the end of the day, 2:47 p.m. I remember that because I had just sent off a report we'd been refining for 2 weeks. I was organizing my notes for a call scheduled at 3:30 with one of our biggest accounts. Then I got a calendar invite. 15 minutes. Conference room B. No subject line. I walked in thinking maybe there was a client emergency or project shift. Instead, I found the HR rep and someone from the executive team, someone I barely knew. No one from my department. No one who had worked with me directly. They didn't ask me to sit, they just read from a paper. My position had been reevaluated, they said. A structural realignment. Nothing personal. They said those words, nothing personal, like that made it easier. Like removing me from my work, my reputation, my professional identity after 2 decades could be clean, impersonal, procedural. No warning, no meeting, no questions, just this strange, sterile moment. I didn't argue, I didn't ask why, I just nodded. I packed up my things. Not all of them, just what I could carry in one trip. I didn't even take my framed certificate, I left it there, maybe out of spite, maybe because I didn't want to see it. There was no scene, no confrontation, just silence. The kind that stays in your chest for days. I walked out past people who didn't know. Some smiled at me. One of them asked, "You heading out early?" I smiled back. Said I had to run. I took the elevator down alone. That night I didn't talk much. I had dinner like usual. Watched a bit of television I barely processed. Went to bed before 10. I woke up early the next morning and made coffee like I always did. But I didn't open my laptop. The silence at first felt like failure. Like maybe I should have said something, done something, fought for my job. But the truth is, I had already given everything I could. For 20 years, I gave them the best of me, and they threw it away like it never mattered. But here's where things started to shift. The first email came 3 days later. A client I had worked with for years. She said she tried to reach me at the office, and when they told her I was no longer with the company, she asked where I had gone. They gave her no answer, just told her I was no longer available. So she reached out personally. Her message was brief. She said she valued our relationship and hoped I was well. She left her number, asked me to call. I didn't call that day or the day after. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready to explain. But she wasn't the last. By the end of the week, 5 more messages, different clients. Some I hadn't spoken to in months. All with the same tone, confusion, concern, disappointment. That's when I realized something the company had forgotten. People don't just remember what you do. They remember how you make them feel. They remember consistency, and they notice when it disappears. The firm had erased me without warning, but what they couldn't erase was trust. One morning, I got a voicemail. I was making breakfast, and I missed the call. I played it back on speaker as I poured coffee. The voice was familiar, someone I had worked with through a particularly tough transition year. He said he heard what happened, called it a mistake they'll regret. Then, he asked if I'd consider consulting independently. That was the first time I even thought about what came next. I hadn't planned for it. I didn't have a website, no business cards. I hadn't drafted a single proposal, but it planted the idea that maybe being let go wasn't the end. Maybe it was the reset I never would have chosen, but now couldn't ignore. That afternoon, I went through my contacts, not to pitch anything, just to reconnect. I sent out a few messages, short, sincere, without agenda. I told them what happened. I told them I wasn't angry, just done. And the replies came quickly. Some offered support, some just wanted to check in, but a few asked something else. Would you consider working with us directly? It wasn't overwhelming. I didn't get hundreds of calls, but I got enough to see the pattern. Enough to realize the firm had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed I was replaceable. They didn't just fire an employee, they severed relationships they didn't build, and the clients they noticed. I still remember one message in particular. It was from a long-term client I had worked with during a particularly volatile expansion phase. He wrote, "We weren't working with your firm. We were working with you. They just held the paperwork." That one stuck with me. So I started thinking, what would it actually take to build something on my own? I didn't need an office. I didn't need a staff. I just needed the foundation I had already built over years of doing things right. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew how hard it was to go solo. I knew how easily doors could close. But it wasn't about ambition. It was about dignity. I had given 20 years to a system that didn't even give me a sentence in return. Now, I had a chance to work on my own terms. Quietly, I started building. One contract, then another. By the time the firm realized clients were leaving, it was already too late. I didn't plan to take anything from them. Not the clients, not their business, not even their reputation. But when someone opens a door for you, and the place you just left slammed one in your face, you learn quickly which direction to walk. It wasn't a master plan. I didn't sit at my kitchen table plotting revenge or daydreaming about bringing them down. I was just trying to survive, to do good work, to protect the relationships I had built, and maintain my own self-respect after they took my role and erased it like a typo. The first contract came through 3 weeks after I left. It was small, a consulting retainer for a client I'd known for over a decade. They had cleared it with legal, made sure there was no conflict clause with my former employer, and then they sent the paperwork directly to me. I signed it, sent it back, and got started the next morning. There was no fanfare, no big announcement, just the quiet return of routine, a calendar full of tasks that mattered, a to-do list with names I respected. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. It wasn't about money, it was about momentum. When you work somewhere for 20 years, your identity becomes tethered to that brand, whether you admit it or not. You wear the badge, answer the emails, attend the meetings, and before long, it becomes a part of your name. But once you're cut off, clean and sudden like I was, you're forced to ask, who am I without the logo? Turns out, I was someone people still trusted, still wanted to work with, still reached out to when things got messy. One of the clients who followed me was a regional account that had been with the firm longer than I had. I had handled their account transitions, their expansions, their internal crises. I knew their systems better than some of their own team did. When they called, they didn't mince words. "We didn't sign on for the name," he told me. "We signed on because you handled things." They terminated their agreement with my former employer the following month. That's when things got complicated. I started getting calls from people still inside the firm. Not management, but former colleagues. Some I barely spoke to during my time there. They were reaching out quietly, carefully. Some just to say they missed working with me. Some to ask how I was doing. A few to ask if I had any openings for contract work. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to poach. I didn't want to become what I'd always resented, the person who burns the house down after moving out. But I realized something. The house was already on fire. They just hadn't noticed yet. Several of the firm's long-standing clients had grown frustrated. They weren't getting responses. Timelines were slipping. Projects that I'd built from the ground up were being passed down to junior staff who didn't understand the nuances. They weren't bad people, just rushed, overloaded, unsupported. And the clients? They weren't staying silent. One of them emailed me directly. They'd worked with me on a high-risk compliance rollout the year prior. They said, "We're thinking of pulling the plug unless things change. Are you available?" I was. And they did. Each time this happened, I felt a twinge of guilt, like I was dismantling something I helped build. But then I remembered I wasn't the one who broke it. They did that the moment they decided my 20 years of contribution could be swept away without a conversation. The deeper irony, they didn't just fire me. They created their own competition, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. By month 4, I had signed 7 clients. Some small, some substantial, all steady. I hadn't hired anyone yet. I didn't even have a website, just a name, a spreadsheet, and a folder of signed agreements. My days were full. My inbox had rhythm again. Then one morning, I got a call from someone I hadn't expected. He was a senior manager I used to report to, 2 levels above me back then. We hadn't always seen eye to eye, but we had mutual respect. He wasn't calling to apologize. He wasn't even calling to explain. He was calling to ask if I'd consider returning. Not to the same position, not even with the same title, but as a consultant. "You'd have flexibility," he said. "We'd bring you in on strategy and transition projects, high-level, client-facing." I let the silence hang. Not to be dramatic, just to make space for what he wasn't saying. They needed me, and they hadn't seen that until I was gone. I didn't say yes, I didn't say no either. I told him I'd think about it. Then I hung up, sat back in my chair, and laughed. Not out of ego, just disbelief. 4 months ago, they removed me from the building like an outdated fixture. Now, they wanted me back. On my terms. I didn't go back, not because I was angry. I wasn't. That's the strangest part. I had moved on. What stayed with me wasn't the dismissal itself, but how little they understood the damage they'd done, not just to me, but to their own foundation. Trust isn't built on PowerPoints and performance reviews. It's built in the quiet hours, the hard calls, the problems that don't have easy answers. It's built over time and lost in a moment. That moment had already passed. In the months that followed, I formalized the business, registered the name, opened a business account, started turning down work because I didn't have the hours. I had to. There was only one of me. That's when I started thinking about hiring, not building an empire, just a small team. People I knew or trained myself, people who understood the work the way I did, who didn't need to be flashy, just precise, reliable, sincere, the kind of professionals who didn't chase titles, who just got things done. I made a short list of names, then I reached out. Some didn't respond, some weren't available, but a few said yes before I even finished explaining. They said the same thing in different ways. You always treated people right. That matters. So I brought them in. Slowly. carefully. No big announcements, no restructuring, just work, good work, with people who cared, and the clients kept coming. I never imagined I'd be running my own firm. It wasn't a dream I'd been chasing or a path I'd ever mapped out in a journal. It just unfolded. One steady decision after another. None of them flashy, just deliberate. One client, then another. Then someone to help with the load. But it changed me. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd adjusted, bent, or edited in those 2 decades until I started building something outside their shadow. The conversations were different. The expectations were different. Even the way I spoke was different. I no longer had to cushion every word or translate every thought into executive language. I could be honest, not blunt, not careless, just clear. And that clarity, it attracted the right kind of people. The small team I'd pulled together, contractors, not employees, began working like a machine. Not perfect, but dependable. There were no office politics, no layers of bureaucracy, no endless meetings that led nowhere. Just a shared understanding, do good work, treat people right, be transparent. It wasn't revolutionary, it was just rare. The funny part? I was still using processes I had developed at my old firm. Frameworks I'd built, systems I'd refined over years. But now, they were finally being used the way I designed them, without being buried under 5 layers of revisions or passed off under someone else's name. There was satisfaction in that. Not revenge, not vindication, just quiet satisfaction. But the past has a way of circling back, especially when it's unresolved. One afternoon I got an email from someone in legal, not my legal, theirs. It was framed politely, professionally, a request for a brief conversation about client overlap and potential conflicts. Standard language, but the tone wasn't hard to read between. They were feeling the loss, and maybe, for the first time, starting to admit it. I had nothing to hide. I agreed to the call. They came with bullet points, concerns, a few subtle warnings. Nothing aggressive, just enough to remind me they were watching. That they remembered who I was, even if they'd pretended not to for a while. I listened. I answered every question clearly. I told them the truth. Clients had approached me, not the other way around. No contracts had been breached, no NDAs violated, no poaching, no solicitation. Just trust, earned the hard way, showing up again. They didn't say much after that, just a vague thank you and a promise to stay in touch. That was the last I heard from them. But the silence spoke volumes. They were trying to stem the leak, not repair the pipe. Still stuck in damage control mode, hoping they could scare their way back into relevance. But it doesn't work that way. Not with people. Not with reputation. In the months that followed, things grew fast. Faster than I was comfortable with, to be honest. Growth is easy to romanticize until it shows up at your door and demands a schedule, a system, a second phone line, and someone to handle admin because you haven't slept in 2 days. I brought on a part-time operations lead, someone detail-oriented, calm under pressure, steady. She kept things moving while I focused on what I did best, solving problems, guiding clients, and keeping the work sharp. I turned down projects, said no more than I said yes, not because I could afford to be picky, but because I refused to sacrifice what made us different. Every time I had a hard decision to make, I thought back to the day they let me go, the way they did it, the silence, the hallway, the look on my coworkers' faces as I walked out without a folder, without a plan. That memory became a filter, a standard. I decided I would never treat anyone the way they treated me. That included my team, my clients, even myself. One Friday evening, I was on a call with a longtime client. We had wrapped up a complex rollout ahead of schedule, and he stayed on the line for a moment after the final update. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You're the only reason we didn't leave years ago. They just didn't realize how much you were holding together." I didn't say anything at first, because I'd never really heard it spoken out loud like that. But I knew he was right, and now they were paying for what they didn't see. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had spent so many hours debating tools, budgets, expansion strategies, chasing growth while ignoring the people actually delivering it. And in the end, the people left. Quietly, not in protest, just in self-preservation. One by one, the foundation slipped out from under them. I wasn't trying to become a competitor. I wasn't launching campaigns, taking out ads, or publicly criticizing anyone. I was just doing what they stopped letting me do, my job. And clients kept showing up. Not because I was the cheapest, not because I was flashy, but because I was still the same guy they trusted to tell them the truth and get it done. Eventually, I had to make a choice. Stay in this middle ground, part consultant, part service provider, or step fully into the new space I'd built. Commit, brand it, scale it, or keep it small and personal, just enough. I chose something in between. I didn't need to be big, I just needed to be solid. I refined the offering, cleaned up the contracts, set boundaries, hired one more person, not for capacity but for quality. Someone who didn't need hand-holding, someone who understood people. And then, one morning, I got an unexpected message. It was from a former intern, someone I had mentored years ago. He was now working with a major client that used to be one of our firm's biggest accounts. He said, "They've been asking around about you." Quietly, "I think they're about to jump." I read that line 3 times. Not because I was eager, but because, deep down, I knew this moment was coming. The message stayed with me all day. Not because I needed their business. By then, we were doing just fine. But because it was the kind of client we never thought would move. Too big, too embedded, too many layers of legacy contracts. They were the kind you assumed would stick around forever just out of inertia. But inertia only lasts so long when the engine stops running. 2 weeks later, they reached out directly. Polite, professional, curious. They asked for a conversation. Informal, they said, just to see what working together might look like. I agreed, but I kept my expectations low. Big firms don't pivot quickly, and I wasn't about to get pulled into a game of meetings and memos for a maybe. But the call surprised me. Not because of what they said, but how they said it. There was no posturing, no thinly veiled attempts to pull rank. Just clear, honest questions. What would you do differently? How do you structure your work? What do your clients value most? I answered every one of them plainly. I told them what we did well and what we didn't. I told them I wouldn't undercut my rates and I wouldn't overpromise. I also told them I'd rather say no to a project than ruin a relationship trying to force it. They thanked me, and they said they'd be in touch. I didn't think much of it after that. I had other clients, other work to deliver. I moved on with my week. Then, 3 days later, the contract showed up. They weren't just thinking about moving. They had decided, quietly, completely. Just like that, and with that, the last remaining thread that connected me to my old firm snapped. Not with a bang, not with a public announcement. Just a clean, silent break. They had lost one of their oldest, largest clients. Not because someone stole it, but because they let it drift too far for too long. And by the time they noticed, it had already landed elsewhere. That same week, I walked into the small co-working space we used and looked at the team, 3 people now, heads down, focused, steady. I realized I had everything I thought I needed 20 years to build. Except now, it was mine. Not a title on a business card, not a temporary promotion, not a seat at someone else's table. Mine. And it didn't come with drama or applause, just a quiet sense of balance, like the pieces had finally clicked into place after months, years of feeling slightly off. Sometimes we chase validation from the places that broke us. We wait for them to apologize, to recognize what they missed, to say the words we think we need to hear to move forward. But we don't need those words. We just need the work, the people, the proof that we weren't wrong about who we are. We were just in the wrong place to be seen. I still think about that day, the way they let me go without a conversation, without context, without a trace of gratitude. And I'm glad. Because if they hadn't done it that way, I might have stayed. I might have convinced myself to keep adjusting, keep shrinking, keep carrying things they'd long stopped valuing. And I would have missed this, the version of my career where I finally stopped asking for permission and just did the work the right way. There's no billboard for that kind of success, no speech, no plaque, just quiet momentum. Days filled with meaning. Clients who respect you. Work you're proud of. That's more than enough. So, no, I didn't burn any bridges, but I didn't walk back across them either, and I never will.